Welcome back, dear listener. In the last part of our story, we uncovered how the geisha world was built, its rules, its training, and the fragile balance of art and society. Now, as we continue, we step further into their world. Together, we will explore not only the daily lives of geisha, but also the deeper meanings of their presence, the philosophies of impermanence, refinement, and presence that made them more than entertainers, but living symbols of Japan itself. So wherever you are, and whatever time it is for you, take a deep breath, settle in, and let us continue our journey into the timeless world of the geisha. The dawn of the 1990s brought with it yet another transformation for Japan, and with it for the geisha. The nation's post-war economic miracle had propelled it to global prominence. But by the early 1990s, the so-called bubble economy collapsed, plunging Japan into financial stagnation that would linger for decades. For the geisha, whose survival had always depended on the interplay of wealth, tradition, and cultural value, this economic shift presented new challenges. Yet it also opened the way for new roles, new audiences, and new forms of cultural engagement. The bursting of the bubble in 1991 struck directly at the corporate culture that had long sustained geisha districts. Lavish banquets, once funded by expansive business budgets, were curtailed or canceled altogether. Companies tightened expenses, cutting back on entertainment, and with them went the steady flow of ozashiki engagements. For many ukiyo, this meant a sharp decline in income. Some closed permanently, unable to adapt to the new financial climate. The hanamachi, once filled with light and music every evening, fell quieter, their survival no longer guaranteed. And yet, as so often in their history, the geisha adapted. The 1990s saw a deliberate shift toward cultural tourism and heritage preservation. Rather than relying solely on corporate patronage, many hanamachi opened themselves more deliberately to public audiences. Festivals such as Kyoto's Miyako Odori became not only annual traditions, but key attractions for both domestic and international tourists. Special performances were marketed to visitors who sought authentic cultural experiences, positioning geisha not only as entertainers, but as custodians of national identity. Tourism became a lifeline. Foreign visitors arriving in Japan increasingly sought encounters with geisha, whose image had been popularized worldwide through films, novels, and photography. Travel agencies organized tours of Kyoto's Gion, where glimpses of Maiko walking through lantern-lit streets were treated as highlights of the journey. For many, the sight of a young apprentice in brightly patterned kimono, her white painted face glowing in the evening, was a moment of enchantment, a living connection to the Japan of imagination. The influence of media during this era was profound. Internationally, Arthur Golden's novel Memoirs of a Geisha, 1997, and its subsequent film adaptation in 2005 brought unprecedented attention to geisha culture. While the story was fictional and often criticized for inaccuracies, it nonetheless introduced millions around the world to the word geisha and sparked fascination with their lives. Geisha communities in Japan had mixed reactions. Some welcomed the renewed interest, while others lamented the distortions that fueled stereotypes. Regardless of opinion, the effect was undeniable. Geisha had become global icons of Japanese tradition. Within Japan, documentaries, television specials, and magazine features showcased geisha life. often framing them as living treasures. Interviews with senior geisha emphasized the discipline and hardship behind the elegance, while profiles of young Mako highlighted the continuity of tradition. These portrayals helped combat misconceptions, presenting geisha not as relics or courtesans, but as artists whose survival embodied resilience. The 1990s and 2000s also saw increased institutional support. Recognizing the cultural value of geisha traditions, local governments and cultural organizations implemented preservation initiatives. Dance schools and shamisen lineages were designated as important intangible cultural properties, ensuring that resources were allocated for their continuation. Festivals received municipal sponsorship, transforming them into celebrated public events that reinforced the role of geisha as heritage. For the geisha themselves, the era was one of recalibration. Without the steady income of corporate banquets, many relied more heavily on tourism and public performances. This shift altered the dynamics of their profession. Whereas ozashiki banquets had emphasized intimacy and exclusivity, public shows demanded spectacle and accessibility. Geisha learned to perform for larger, more diverse audiences, balancing tradition with theatricality. For apprentices, this meant not only mastering the subtle art of conversation at banquets, but also adjusting to the stagecraft required for festival performances. The decline in numbers continued, however. By the 1990s, the population of geisha had fallen to a fraction of its pre-war size. The profession, once central to urban entertainment, was now a niche, sustained by devotion and cultural value rather than economic necessity. Yet this decline also sharpened their symbolic power. With fewer geisha, each performance carried greater weight. Each festival appearance became more precious, and each apprentice represented continuity against the odds. The philosophy of impermanence, so deeply embedded in geisha tradition, remained their strength. In a Japan grappling with economic stagnation and rapid globalization, the fleeting beauty of geisha performances reminded audiences of values beyond material success. A shamisen melody fading into silence, a dance evoking the falling of blossoms, a smile offered across tatami. These moments reaffirmed the enduring power of refinement. Patrons often described evenings with geisha as experiences of timeless Japan, sanctuaries of beauty in a restless world. By the close of the 20th century, geisha had survived yet another upheaval. They had endured the collapse of corporate patronage, adapted to tourism, and reasserted their role as custodians of tradition. They were fewer in number, but more globally recognized than ever before. In Kyoto's lantern-lit streets, in Tokyo's restored tea houses, in festivals attended by thousands, they remained visible symbols of refinement. Their story had once again proven that impermanence was not fragility, but resilience, a truth carried forward into the new millennium. The new millennium opened with both promise and uncertainty for the geisha. Japan was still grappling with the after-effects of the economic stagnation of the 1990s, while globalization and digital technology reshaped society at unprecedented speed. In this shifting world, the geisha, already diminished in number but elevated in symbolism, entered the 21st century as both fragile and enduring, a living tradition negotiating its place in modernity. One of the most significant cultural events for geisha in the 2000s was the release of Arthur Golden's memoirs of a geisha film adaptation in 2005. based on the 1997 novel. The Hollywood production drew global attention to geisha life, portraying it with sweeping visuals and dramatic storytelling. For millions around the world, this was their first direct encounter with the concept of geisha, and fascination surged. Tourism to Kyoto's Gion district spiked as visitors sought to glimpse Maiko in their brightly colored kimono, walking through narrow alleyways under glowing lanterns. Yet the attention was double-edged. While the film popularized the geisha image internationally, it also perpetuated inaccuracies. Many geisha criticized its romanticized and, at times, misleading depictions, particularly the conflation of geisha with courtesans. Senior geisha and cultural commentators responded by emphasizing authenticity, organizing interviews, documentaries, and books that clarified the true nature of their profession. In this sense, the film sparked not only fascination, but also a wave of corrective narratives, giving geisha communities new opportunities to assert their identity on their own terms. Within Japan, geisha life in the 2000s was increasingly tied to tourism and cultural preservation. Kyoto's annual Miyako Odori continued to attract large audiences, including international visitors. Other districts launched similar showcases, blending traditional performance with modern stagecraft to appeal to broader audiences. Tour companies offered geisha experiences, from attending short performances to learning elements of tea ceremony and shamisen. While some traditionalists worried about dilution, others saw these efforts as essential to survival in a rapidly changing cultural economy. Digital media introduced new dimensions. Websites, blogs, and eventually social media platforms began featuring photographs and stories of Maiko and geisha. Images once confined to postcards and magazines now circulated instantly across the globe, shared by tourists and enthusiasts alike. This new visibility expanded their reach, but also increased the risk of oversimplification, as snapshots could not capture the discipline and hardship behind the elegance. Geisha themselves, traditionally shrouded in secrecy, faced the challenge of navigating a world where privacy was harder to maintain. Economically, the geisha communities remained fragile but resilient. Corporate patronage had not disappeared, but it was no longer the stable foundation it had once been. Instead, income increasingly came from festivals, staged performances, and tourism-related activities. Some geisha houses collaborated with cultural organizations, universities, and governments to secure funding for preservation, framing their art as intangible heritage worthy of protection. These partnerships underscored their role not just as entertainers, but as custodians of national culture. The number of geisha continued to decline, yet those who remained were often highly skilled, motivated by deep commitment rather than economic necessity. Young women who chose to become Maiko in the 2000s often did so out of fascination with tradition, drawn by the beauty of kimono, the discipline of training, or the desire to embody a living link to Japanese history. Their presence reassured audiences that the line of transmission was unbroken, even if smaller in scale. Public perception of geisha in Japan was increasingly ambivalent. On one hand, they were admired as cultural treasures, often described in terms of nostalgia and national pride. On the other, they were seen as distant from everyday life, their world confined to festivals and staged encounters rather than integrated into the fabric of modern society. For many Japanese citizens, Encountering geisha directly became a rare event, accessible primarily through tourism or media portrayals. Foreign fascination, however, grew stronger. For international visitors, seeing geisha in Kyoto became one of the highlights of traveling to Japan, akin to visiting temples or viewing cherry blossoms. Travel magazines, documentaries, and online platforms highlighted them as quintessentially Japanese experiences, reinforcing their global reputation. While misunderstandings persisted, geisha communities embraced their role as cultural ambassadors, welcoming visitors while carefully preserving authenticity. The philosophy of impermanence remained central to their appeal. In a world increasingly dominated by digital permanence, photos archived indefinitely, videos replayed endlessly, geisha performances stood as reminders of beauty that existed only in the moment. A dance that vanished as soon as it ended, a shamisen note dissolving into silence, a smile fading with the night. These experiences could not be fully captured by a camera. Patrons often remarked that this fleeting quality was what made geisha encounters so powerful. They were not just performances, but ephemeral connections that lingered in memory. By the end of the 2000s, the geisha had redefined their place in society. They were fewer in number, less central to everyday entertainment, but more globally recognized than ever before. Their survival in the age of globalization and digital media demonstrated once again their resilience, their ability to adapt without losing essence. They had endured centuries of change, and now they entered the 21st century as living heritage, admired both at home and abroad as symbols of refinement, continuity, and impermanence. The 2010s brought sweeping transformations to the world of geisha, shaped less by local economies and more by global connectivity. Japan, long admired for its culture and innovation, became more accessible than ever as cheap flights, digital platforms, and global curiosity drew millions of visitors. Within this shifting environment, geisha life faced new opportunities and pressures. An expansion of visibility through social media, a surge of cultural tourism, and the challenge of balancing authenticity with accessibility in a digital-first world. Tourism surged in the 2010s. Kyoto, in particular, became a magnet for international travelers, many of whom came specifically hoping to glimpse geisha or maiko. Narrow streets in Gion teemed with visitors carrying cameras, waiting for a fleeting sight of a young apprentice hurrying to an evening engagement. For many tourists, such a moment was as valuable as seeing cherry blossoms in spring or Mount Fuji in the distance. A living symbol of Japanese tradition captured in a brief encounter. This influx of visitors, however, created tensions. The increased visibility of geisha in public spaces led to misunderstandings and, at times, intrusions. Some tourists treated geisha as spectacles rather than artists, crowding them for photographs or blocking their path. In response, districts like Gion introduced guidelines and restrictions, emphasizing that geisha were not actors performing in open streets, but professionals engaged in their work. Signs in multiple languages reminded visitors to respect boundaries, an acknowledgement of the challenges brought by global attention in the digital age. Social media amplified both fascination and distortion. Platforms like Instagram and YouTube filled with images and videos of maiko and geisha, often posted by tourists, but also by enthusiasts and cultural organizations. These images reached millions worldwide, reinforcing the allure of geisha as icons of beauty and tradition. Yet, as with earlier forms of media, the danger of oversimplification persisted. A single photograph of a maiko in brilliant kimono could inspire awe, but revealed little of the discipline, training, and sacrifice behind the image. Some geisha communities cautiously embrace digital media, recognizing its potential to educate and engage. Official websites provided accurate information about performances, traditions, and etiquette. Documentaries streamed online introduce global audiences to the realities of geisha life, highlighting both artistry and hardship. A few geisha even appeared in controlled interviews, explaining their work in their own words, a significant shift from the secrecy that had long defined their world. These efforts reflected a delicate balance, preserving mystery while correcting misconceptions, embracing visibility while protecting authenticity. Generational change also shaped the 2010s, with fewer young women choosing the path of geisha. Each apprentice became all the more precious. Families who once might have seen geisha life as a route to independence now encourage daughters to pursue education and professional careers in business, technology, or the arts. For those who did choose to become maiko, the decision was often deeply personal, motivated by passion for tradition rather than necessity. These young women entered the Hanamechi aware that they were carrying forward a fragile legacy, their lives shaped by both pride and responsibility. Training in this era continued with rigor, though adjusted for modern circumstances. Dance schools preserved centuries-old repertoires, while shamisen instructors maintained lineages of melody. At the same time, new challenges arose, balancing school education with ukiyo responsibilities, navigating the expectations of global audiences, and mastering not only the subtleties of tatami room conversation, but also the public stage of international festivals. Geisha of the 2010s were artists shaped not only by tradition, but by globalization. The economic model of geisha districts shifted further toward cultural events and heritage tourism. Festivals such as the Miyako Odori and the Kyo Odori became major attractions, marketed as essential experiences for visitors to Japan. Corporate banquets persisted but were fewer, replaced by staged performances accessible to larger audiences. For geisha, this meant performing less frequently in intimate ozashiki settings and more often on stages, where subtle gestures risked being overshadowed by theatrical spectacle. Yet they adapted, ensuring that even in public performances, the essence of refinement remained intact. International fascination remained strong. Travel blogs, documentaries, and cultural programs presented geisha as symbols of Japanese identity, often emphasizing their endurance in a modern world. For many foreigners, attending a geisha performance or tea ceremony became the highlight of a trip to Japan. Some districts even introduced programs allowing visitors to meet geisha in structured environments, where etiquette could be explained and authenticity preserved. These initiatives both sustained income and reinforced education, countering lingering stereotypes. Yet the 2010s also deepened the tension between preservation and adaptation. Should geisha remain exclusive, their art experienced only by a select few? Or should they open themselves more fully to public audiences, ensuring survival through accessibility? Different hanamachi answered in different ways, reflecting the diversity of approaches within the profession. Some remained fiercely private, preserving the intimacy of ozashiki at all costs. Others embraced visibility, participating in festivals, collaborations, and international tours. Through it all, the philosophy of impermanence continued to guide them. In an age when digital images promised permanence, photos stored indefinitely, videos replayed endlessly, Geisha reminded audiences of beauty that existed only in the moment. Patrons who sat in tatami rooms, listening to shamisen, watching a sleeve ripple and dance, knew that no camera could capture the experience fully. It was an art of presence, of fleeting elegance, and in that impermanence lay its power. By the end of the 2010s, Geisha had once again proven their resilience. Their numbers were fewer than ever, their communities smaller, yet their symbolic weight greater. They had survived the economic stagnation of the 1990s, the global fascination of the 2000s, and the digital explosion of the 2010s. They stood as living traditions in a modern world, blossoms that bloomed less frequently but no less beautifully. Their impermanence transformed into endurance. The decade of the 2020s began with quiet optimism for the geisha. Tourism was thriving, international fascination was strong, and Japan prepared to host the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, which promised a global spotlight. For geisha districts, the influx of visitors offered opportunities for performances, cultural exchanges, and renewed recognition. In Kyoto's Gion, anticipation filled the streets as businesses prepared for the arrival of millions of tourists. But then, in early 2020, the world changed. The COVID-19 pandemic struck Japan with the same sudden force that it struck everywhere else. Borders closed, flights were canceled, and tourism collapsed almost overnight. For the geisha, whose survival had increasingly depended on visitors, both foreign and domestic, the effect was devastating. Performances were canceled, banquets postponed indefinitely, and tea houses shuttered. The narrow lantern-lit streets of Gion, once bustling with anticipation each evening, fell silent. For many ukiyo, the sudden loss of income was catastrophic. Apprentices who had spent years training found themselves without opportunities to perform. Senior geisha, accustomed to balancing artistry with patronage, faced uncertainty unlike anything they had known before. Some communities relied on savings or support from local governments, while others organized fundraising campaigns, appealing to citizens to help preserve a tradition under threat. The fragility of the geisha world, long concealed behind elegance, was laid bare by the pandemic. Yet even in this crisis, resilience emerged. Some geisha turned to digital platforms, experimenting with live-streamed performances or recorded shamisen concerts. While these efforts could not replicate the intimacy of tatami rooms, they allowed geisha to reach audiences beyond Japan, reminding the world of their presence. Cultural organizations collaborated with Hanamachi to create online festivals, showcasing dances and music in virtual spaces. These adaptations demonstrated once again the capacity of geisha to survive by flowing with change, even in the face of global disruption. The absence of physical encounters, however, deepened appreciation for what made geisha art unique. Patrons realized that no screen could capture the subtle atmosphere of ozashiki, the shared laughter, the quiet rhythm of conversation, the fleeting beauty of a dance unfolding in candlelight. When restrictions eased and performances resumed, audiences returned with renewed reverence, grateful for the return of experiences that could not be digitized. In this sense, the pandemic underscored the value of impermanence, reminding society that beauty exists most powerfully when it cannot be replicated. The crisis also prompted reflection within the geisha communities themselves. Some questioned whether reliance on tourism had made them too vulnerable, urging a return to more traditional models of patronage and local support. Others saw digital engagement as a necessary evolution, a way to educate new generations and expand their global audience. Debates within Hanamachi reflected the diversity of perspectives, but all agreed on one point. The future of geisha would require both preservation and innovation. Generational challenges persisted. The number of active geisha continued to decline, with fewer young women choosing the path. The pandemic only deepened this trend, as uncertainty discouraged potential apprentices. Yet those who did commit to training in the 2020s often did so with extraordinary dedication, aware that they were carrying forward a fragile legacy. Their presence reassured communities that despite hardship, the tradition would endure. Public perception of geisha during the pandemic highlighted their symbolic role. Newspapers and documentaries emphasized their struggles as representative of the broader impact on traditional culture. Citizens donated to preservation efforts, not only to support individuals, but to safeguard a heritage seen as integral to national identity. In this way, the geisha once again embodied resilience, their survival seen as intertwined with the endurance of Japan's cultural soul. By the mid-2020s, as restrictions eased and tourism gradually returned, geisha communities began to recover. Festivals resumed, though often with smaller audiences. Tourists once again sought glimpses of Maiko in lantern-lit streets, though now with heightened awareness of their fragility. For the geisha, the return of patrons was both relief and reminder. Their art, though resilient, remained deeply vulnerable to forces beyond their control. The pandemic had proven a harsh teacher, but also a clarifying one. It reminded both geisha and society of what was essential: the irreplaceable value of presence, the beauty of impermanence, and the strength of resilience. It underscored that geisha were not relics of the past, but living traditions, capable of adaptation even in the face of global crisis. And it reaffirmed that their art, fragile and fleeting, carried meaning precisely because it could not be replaced. As Japan looked toward the future of the 2020s, the geisha stood once again as survivors. Their numbers were fewer, their communities smaller, but their presence endured. In their dances, their songs, and their smiles, they carried forward centuries of refinement, reminding a restless world that even in times of disruption, beauty remains essential. They had faced fire, war, modernization, and now a pandemic, and each time they had endured. Their story in the 2020s was thus not one of decline, but of persistence, an affirmation that impermanence, embraced with grace, is the secret to survival. As Japan moves further into the 21st century, the geisha remain both fragile and resilient, their art carried forward by smaller numbers but greater symbolic weight. In an era defined by globalization, digital media, and rapid social change, they stand as reminders of continuity, their presence connecting the present to centuries of tradition. While their world has grown smaller, Their significance as cultural icons has never been greater. Today, geisha are most visible in a handful of Hanamachi districts. Kyoto's Gion continues to be the heart of geisha tradition, with Maiko and Geiko, as geisha are called in Kyoto, maintaining rigorous training in dance, shamisen, and etiquette. Tokyo's Shinbashi and Akasaka also endure, though with fewer houses than in earlier decades. Smaller Hanamachi across Japan, from Kanazawa to Niigata, keep their traditions alive with pride even if their numbers are modest. These districts serve as cultural enclaves, sanctuaries where the rhythms of geisha life, morning lessons, evening banquets, seasonal performances, continue much as they did generations ago. The number of active geisha in Japan today is estimated to be in the low thousands, a fraction of what it once was. Yet the women who choose this path do so with deep commitment. Unlike earlier centuries, when becoming a geisha was sometimes a matter of economic necessity, today it is often a conscious decision rooted in passion for tradition. Many apprentices are drawn by the beauty of kimono, the elegance of dance, and the allure of carrying forward a living heritage. Their dedication ensures that geisha culture, though smaller in scale, remains vibrant. Public performances remain central to their survival. Festivals such as the Miyako Odori in Kyoto, the Kyo Odori, and the Kitano Odori draw large audiences, including international visitors who see them as essential cultural experiences. These performances are carefully staged, blending authenticity with accessibility, allowing audiences unfamiliar with the subtleties of ozashiki to appreciate the refinement of geisha art. In these settings, geisha are both performers and ambassadors, offering glimpses into a tradition that continues to captivate. Tourism continues to be a vital source of support. Visitors to Kyoto often list seeing a geisha as one of their most desired experiences, whether through formal performances, tea ceremonies, or fleeting encounters on lantern-lit streets. While this attention sometimes leads to misunderstandings or intrusions, geisha districts have adapted, creating structured opportunities for visitors to engage respectfully. Educational programs, guided tours, and cultural exchanges ensure that encounters are grounded in understanding rather than spectacle. Digital media, once a source of concern, has also become a tool for preservation and education. Official websites, documentaries, and social media accounts managed by cultural organizations share accurate information about geisha life. Carefully curated photographs and videos allow global audiences to appreciate their artistry while maintaining boundaries around private rituals. In this way, geisha have found a place in the digital age without sacrificing their essential aura of mystery. Government recognition has further reinforced their role. Geisha traditions are increasingly framed as intangible cultural heritage, with official support for preservation efforts. Grants and sponsorships ensure that dance schools, shamisen lineages, and seasonal performances continue. For many Japanese, geisha have become not only entertainers but cultural treasures, figures whose survival affirms national identity in a rapidly changing world. Yet challenges remain. The declining number of apprentices continues to worry Hanamachi leaders, who fear that without new generations, traditions may fade. Economic pressures also persist, as the costs of training, kimono, and performance remain high while patronage remains limited. The balance between exclusivity and accessibility continues to be delicate. Too much openness risks diluting authenticity, while too much secrecy risks obscurity. For Geisha themselves, life today is a blend of pride and struggle. They take pride in embodying centuries of tradition, in being recognized as cultural icons, admired worldwide. Yet they also navigate the same pressures as other women in modern Japan. Questions of independence, career, and future security. Some choose to retire early, while others dedicate their lives to training apprentices and preserving the art. Each path reflects the enduring reality of impermanence, that geisha life, like the dances they perform, is fleeting yet meaningful. In the global imagination, geisha remain among the most iconic symbols of Japan. Tourists, scholars, and artists continue to be fascinated by them, often drawn by their combination of elegance, mystery, and endurance. While stereotypes persist, increasing efforts by geisha communities to educate and clarify their identity have helped reshape perceptions. Today, geisha are more widely understood as artists and cultural custodians, rather than as the distorted figures of earlier misunderstandings. The philosophy that has always sustained them, embracing impermanence, remains their greatest strength. In a world obsessed with speed, permanence, and digital replication, geisha remind us that beauty lies in the moment. A note of music fading into silence, a sleeve brushing the tatami, a smile offered and gone. Their art does not resist impermanence. It celebrates it. And in this celebration lies endurance, for as long as there are those willing to embody refinement, the tradition will live on. Looking to the future, the geisha face both challenges and opportunities. Their numbers may continue to decline, but their symbolic importance will likely grow as Japan and the world increasingly value cultural heritage in an age of globalization. With careful preservation, innovative adaptation, and the continued dedication of apprentices, the floating world will endure, not as it once was, but as it has always been. A living tradition shaped by change, yet faithful to its essence. The geisha of today are fewer, but no less graceful. They walk lantern-lit streets in Kyoto, perform in festivals that captivate audiences, and teach apprentices who will carry their art into tomorrow. They are blossoms that bloom briefly yet beautifully, reminders that impermanence is not loss, but life itself. Their story continues, a thread woven through centuries, connecting past to present, tradition to modernity, and fragility to endurance. The future of the geisha is a subject of both anxiety and hope, a delicate balance between preservation and change. As Japan advances deeper into the 21st century, questions abound. Can a profession rooted in centuries-old rituals survive in a world of smartphones, globalized entertainment, and shifting social values? Can young women still be persuaded to dedicate their lives to an art that demands sacrifice, discipline, and impermanence? And what does the survival of geisha mean for Japan itself, a nation both proud of its traditions and restless in its modernity? The challenges are undeniable. The number of geisha continues to decline, with estimates suggesting only a few thousand remain across Japan, concentrated in Kyoto, Tokyo, Kanazawa, and a handful of other districts. Recruitment of new apprentices is increasingly difficult. Modern Japanese families often encourage daughters to pursue university education and careers in business, science, or the arts. Few see the geisha path as a viable option, given the long years of training, the physical demands of kimono and dance, and the financial uncertainties of the profession. Economic pressures compound the issue. The costs of kimono, hairstyling, and training remain extremely high. While corporate patronage, the traditional backbone of geisha finances, has diminished. Tourism provides income, but it is vulnerable to fluctuations, as the pandemic starkly demonstrated. Balancing exclusivity with accessibility remains an ongoing dilemma. Too much reliance on public performances risks diluting the intimacy that defines geisha culture, while too much exclusivity risks irrelevance in a society that increasingly values openness. Yet alongside these challenges lie opportunities. The global fascination with geisha remains strong, providing both visibility and potential support. International tourists continue to view them as living icons of Japanese culture, and many are willing to pay for authentic experiences. This interest, if managed with care, can help sustain geisha financially while also educating the world about their true identity. The key lies in maintaining authenticity while adapting to the expectations of diverse audiences. Digital platforms also offer potential. While secrecy has always been part of geisha mystique, carefully curated digital presence can enhance preservation. Documentaries, online archives, and educational programs can reach younger generations who might otherwise know little about geisha traditions. Already, some hanamachi have experimented with virtual tours, live-streamed performances, and online lectures about dance, shamisen, and tea ceremony. These initiatives, while not replacements for the intimacy of ozashiki, can supplement income and broaden understanding. Institutional support continues to grow. Governments and cultural organizations increasingly recognize geisha traditions as intangible cultural heritage worth protecting. Grants and preservation programs help sustain dance schools and shamisen lineages. Partnerships with universities and museums provide platforms for education and research. Such recognition elevates geisha from entertainers to cultural custodians, ensuring their survival not only through patronage, but through national identity. Another opportunity lies in reframing geisha for modern society. While the profession is rooted in history, its essence, artistry, refinement, and the celebration of impermanence remains relevant. In a world dominated by speed and distraction, the slow elegance of geisha performance offers an antidote, a reminder of presence and mindfulness. For younger generations seeking authenticity, this timeless quality may hold unexpected appeal. The challenge is to present geisha not as relics, but as living practitioners of values increasingly rare in modern life. For the geisha themselves, the future will depend on adaptability. Some may embrace greater openness, offering more structured encounters for tourists and collaborating with international cultural organizations. Others may hold firmly to tradition, emphasizing exclusivity and secrecy as the essence of refinement. The diversity of approaches may itself be a strength, ensuring that geisha culture survives in multiple forms, each true to its own vision of authenticity. In broader terms, the survival of geisha carries significance beyond their profession. They embody Japan's ability to balance tradition and modernity, continuity and change. Their survival affirms that impermanence, when embraced with grace, becomes endurance. To lose them would not only mean the disappearance of an art form, but the loss of a living philosophy that has shaped Japanese identity for centuries. The future of geisha will likely be smaller in scale, but greater in symbolic weight. They may never again number in the tens of thousands, nor dominate the cultural life of cities as they once did. Instead, they may endure as concentrated treasures, fewer in number, but deeply revered, their performances cherished precisely because they are rare. Like blossoms that bloom briefly each spring, their impermanence will be the source of their beauty and their survival. As Japan continues into the 21st century, the geisha remind us of truths often forgotten in modern life. That beauty is fleeting, that presence is precious, and that tradition endures not by resisting change, but by flowing with it. Whether in lantern-lit streets of Kyoto, on stages before international audiences, or in the quiet training rooms where apprentices rehearse dances passed down for centuries, the geisha remain what they have always been, living testaments to resilience, artistry, and impermanence. Their future may be uncertain, but uncertainty has always been their element. For centuries they have thrived in impermanence, transforming fragility into endurance. And as long as there are those who value the fleeting beauty of a note, a dance, or a smile, the geisha will remain, not relics of the past, but blossoms of the present, blooming briefly, brilliantly, and eternally in memory. To speak of geisha is to speak not only of individuals in kimono, playing shamisen or dancing by lantern light, but of symbols woven deeply into the cultural imagination of Japan and beyond. The geisha are not simply entertainers, nor merely historical curiosities. They are living metaphors, embodying ideas of beauty, impermanence, discipline, and tradition. Their presence in Japanese culture transcends their numbers, carrying meanings that ripple far beyond the walls of tea houses. In Japanese society, geisha have long represented refinement, iki, an aesthetic ideal that values subtlety, elegance, and restraint. Unlike the flamboyance of courtesans or the spectacle of theater, geisha art celebrates the understated, the turn of a wrist, the delicate pause before a note, the suggestion rather than the declaration. This aesthetic speaks to a broader cultural philosophy in Japan, where beauty is often found in what is left unsaid, unseen, or fleeting. A geisha embodies this philosophy, becoming a living expression of wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection and impermanence. Their role as custodians of tradition is equally significant. In a country that has experienced rapid modernization, war, and globalization, geisha stand as reminders of continuity. They embody rituals and forms of art that stretch back centuries, preserving them not as museum pieces, but as living practices. In this way, they reassure society that amid change, there are anchors to the past, roots that remain intact. This symbolic function often matters as much as their actual performances. To know that geisha exist is itself a comfort, a testament that tradition has not been erased. At the same time, geisha represent paradox. They are women who achieved independence in a patriarchal society, earning livelihoods outside the family structure, commanding respect through wit and artistry. Yet they also operated within systems of debt, discipline, and patronage that limited their freedom. They are admired as figures of empowerment and critiqued as symbols of constraint. This tension, unresolved and perhaps unresolvable, gives their image a depth that continues to fascinate. Globally, geisha have become among the most iconic symbols of Japan, alongside cherry blossoms, samurai, and Mount Fuji. But their image abroad has often been distorted, shaped by exoticism and misunderstanding. To many Western audiences, geisha were long conflated with courtesans, their artistry overlooked in favor of a more sensational narrative. This misperception was fueled by travelers' tales, Orientalist art, and later by novels and films that blurred fact and fiction. The geisha became an exotic other, admired for beauty, but misread in essence. The release of memoirs of a geisha in the late 1990s and its film adaptation in 2005 amplified these global perceptions. For millions, it introduced the word geisha for the first time, embedding it in popular culture. Yet while the novel and film sparked fascination, they also perpetuated stereotypes, presenting geisha as tragic heroines caught in webs of romance and sacrifice. Authentic geisha criticized these portrayals, emphasizing that their reality was not one of courtesanship, but of disciplined artistry. Still, the global impact was profound. Geisha became fixtures of the Western imagination, symbols of an exotic Japan that was alluring, mysterious, and often misunderstood. Yet there is another side to global perception. For many visitors to Japan, encounters with geisha are moments of wonder, experiences that transcend stereotype. To sit in a tatami room, to hear shamisen played softly, to watch a dance that evokes seasons and centuries, such experiences often leave lasting impressions. In these moments, tourists encounter not an exotic fantasy but a living tradition. Fragile, yet powerful. Many leave with a new respect for geisha, recognizing them not as relics or myths, but as artists who embody values unfamiliar yet resonant. The duality of perception, misunderstood abroad yet revered at home, shapes the cultural meaning of geisha today. They are both ambassadors and enigmas, symbols that Japan exports and treasures internally. This dual role places them at the center of broader conversations about identity. What does it mean to preserve tradition in a globalized world? How can symbols remain authentic while also accessible? How does one navigate between pride and stereotype? Philosophically, geisha embody impermanence, mujo, a concept central to Japanese thought. Their performances exist only in the moment. They can't be fully recorded or replicated. A note fades, a gesture passes, a smile vanishes as soon as it appears. This impermanence is not a weakness, but a strength. A reminder that beauty lies not in permanence, but in transience. In a modern world obsessed with capturing and archiving, geisha remind us of the irreplaceable value of presence. In this sense, their cultural meaning extends beyond Japan. They offer lessons to a global society increasingly consumed by speed and distraction. They embody mindfulness, the art of being fully present. They remind us that refinement lies not in spectacle, but in suggestion, not in abundance, but in restraint. Their meaning is not only Japanese, but universal, a symbol of how humanity can honor beauty in the fleeting and the fragile. To understand the geisha fully, one must look beyond the surface of painted faces and elaborate kimono. Their cultural meaning is not only in what they perform, but in what they embody. A philosophy of beauty, a discipline of art, and a symbol of the Japanese spirit. To sit with geisha is to encounter more than music or dance. It is to encounter a worldview expressed through gestures, pauses, and presences too subtle for words. Geisha symbolize the Japanese aesthetic of ma, the power of the interval, the beauty of silence between notes, the grace of space left unfilled. In a geisha's performance, What is omitted is as important as what is expressed. A dance step might be deliberately restrained. A gesture might pause just long enough to create longing. A note might fade into silence rather than resolve. This cultivation of restraint contrasts sharply with the extravagance of other art forms and reflects a cultural value deeply embedded in Japanese life. That beauty lies in balance, suggestion, and understatement. Their artistry is also multi-layered. A geisha is not only a dancer or musician, but a practitioner of many arts. She plays the shamisen, masters seasonal dances, practices calligraphy, recites poetry, and engages in witty conversation. She entertains not with a single performance, but with a tapestry of skills woven together seamlessly. In this way, she represents an ideal of cultivated humanity. Someone whose refinement comes not from specialization alone, but from the harmonious blending of diverse talents. This multidimensional artistry positions geisha as metaphors for Japan itself. Like Japan, they balance tradition and adaptation, simplicity and complexity, restraint and elegance. They embody the paradox of impermanence and endurance, fragility and strength. To foreign visitors, geisha often seem to encapsulate the soul of Japan. Mysterious yet approachable, disciplined yet graceful, timeless yet fleeting. The philosophy of impermanence is particularly vivid in their role. A geisha's performance is never the same twice. Each evening, each encounter, each note exists only in the moment. Patrons know this, and it heightens the value of the experience. Unlike a recorded concert or a filmed play, geisha art resists permanence. It thrives in its transience, reminding audiences that the most beautiful things in life cannot be captured, only remembered. In this way, geisha art becomes not only entertainment, but meditation, a living expression of mano no aware, the awareness of life's fleeting beauty. Their meaning also lies in contrast. In modern Japan, where neon lights flash and bullet trains race, the lantern-lit quiet of a geisha district feels like another world. This contrast intensifies their symbolic value. They are not everyday figures, but extraordinary presences, set apart by discipline and ritual. Their very rarity makes them precious, their scarcity heightening their allure. As Japan modernized, geisha became less central but more symbolic, embodying the essence of tradition precisely because they were no longer commonplace. Globally, this symbolism has been magnified. Geisha are often presented as living metaphors for Japan's identity, a country that is both ancient and modern, refined and resilient. To many abroad, they serve as cultural shorthand, icons as instantly recognizable as samurai or cherry blossoms. Yet unlike samurai, whose image is tied to strength and battle, geisha embody beauty, art, and subtle power. They represent a softer, more elusive form of cultural identity, one that complements rather than competes with images of warriors and industry. The duality of power and fragility in their image also resonates philosophically. On the surface, a geisha's world seems fragile, dependent on patronage, vulnerable to economic shifts, defined by impermanence. Yet beneath this fragility lies remarkable resilience. For centuries, they have endured war, modernization, decline, and resurgence. Their survival demonstrates a paradoxical truth, that fragility, embraced with grace, becomes strength. In this sense, geisha embody a lesson not only for Japan, but for humanity. That impermanence, far from being a weakness, is the essence of endurance. Their artistic presence also carries ethical meaning. In a society often dominated by efficiency, productivity, and spectacle, geisha remind audiences of values that resist quantification: refinement, presence, elegance, and subtle joy. They teach through example that human connection is not measured in grand gestures, but in shared moments. Laughter at a witty remark, silence during a haunting melody, companionship in fleeting time. In this way, they embody not only an art, but a philosophy of living. By the 21st century, this philosophical dimension had become perhaps their most important meaning. With fewer geisha in absolute numbers, their performances became less about quantity and more about quality, less about entertainment and more about symbolism. Each geisha, each apprentice, carried not only her own art, but the weight of cultural continuity. Their meaning extended beyond the hanamachi to the imagination of the nation and the world, where they stood as living testaments to the endurance of beauty, refinement, and impermanence. In sum, the geisha are not merely women in kimono or entertainers at banquets. They are symbols of Japan's aesthetic soul, living expressions of values that resist modernity even as they adapt to it. Their cultural meaning is layered: aesthetic, philosophical, symbolic, and ethical. They embody impermanence, refinement, and resilience. They remind us that beauty need not last forever to matter, that presence is more precious than permanence, and that fragility, embraced, becomes strength. The global image of the geisha has long been shaped by a blend of fascination and misunderstanding. From the moment Western travelers first encountered them in the late 19th century, geisha became objects of exotic imagination, figures who seemed to embody the mysterious allure of Japan. Yet what foreigners thought they saw often diverged sharply from reality, creating myths that persist even into the 21st century. Early Western accounts frequently confused geisha with courtesans. Visitors to treaty ports or to entertainment districts often lacked the cultural context to distinguish between women whose profession was rooted in artistic performance and those engaged in sex work. This conflation was reinforced by Orientalist art and literature, which emphasized the sensual and the exotic. Paintings, travelogues, and photographs presented geisha as alluring figures, stripped of the nuance of artistry and discipline that defined their actual lives. The 20th century amplified these distortions. Films, novels, and popular culture abroad often portrayed geisha as tragic heroines or romanticized companions, reinforcing stereotypes of submissive Asian femininity. While these depictions captured global imagination, they obscured the reality of geisha as independent professionals who cultivated artistry, wit, and social presence. The exotic image of the geisha became a mirror reflecting Western desires and fantasies, rather than an accurate portrayal of Japanese tradition. The release of Arthur Golden's Memoirs of a Geisha in 1997 and its film adaptation in 2005 epitomized this dynamic. The novel captivated millions, offering a story of love, sacrifice, and elegance set in the world of geisha. Yet it was widely criticized for inaccuracies, especially within Japan, where geisha and cultural scholars argued that it conflated their role with courtesanship and distorted their practices. For many abroad, however, the book and film became the definitive narrative, shaping perceptions for a generation. The result was a dual reality. On the one hand, Memoirs of a Geisha revived global fascination, inspiring thousands to travel to Kyoto and seek authentic experiences. On the other hand, it entrenched misconceptions, requiring geisha communities to respond actively. Some organized lectures, interviews, and cultural programs to explain their traditions accurately. Others simply embraced the attention, viewing it as an opportunity to sustain interest, even if imperfectly informed. Global tourism further complicated perceptions. For many visitors, encountering a geisha, whether in a staged performance or in the streets of Gion, was a highlight of their trip to Japan. Photographs circulated widely online, often without context, reducing complex traditions to a single visual moment. Social media accelerated this trend, with images of Maiko becoming iconic symbols of Japan in travel marketing. While this visibility fueled admiration, it also risked reinforcing stereotypes, as the subtleties of geisha life could not be conveyed in snapshots. Efforts to correct these perceptions have grown stronger in recent decades. Documentaries, museum exhibitions, and academic studies have emphasized the artistry and discipline behind geisha traditions. Cultural organizations highlight their role as preservers of heritage, distinguishing them from misconceptions of sexuality. Some geisha themselves have participated in interviews and controlled media appearances, using their voices to define their identity rather than allowing outsiders to speak for them. The challenge of global perception lies in the balance between mystery and education. Part of the geisha's allure is their aura of secrecy, the sense that they inhabit a world apart from ordinary life. Yet secrecy also fuels misunderstanding, allowing stereotypes to flourish. Navigating this paradox requires deliberate effort. Enough openness to correct falsehoods, enough mystery to preserve elegance. Different hanamechi respond in different ways, reflecting the diversity of approaches within the profession. Despite the challenges, global fascination with geisha remains a source of resilience. Foreign audiences continue to view them as living icons of Japan, symbols of a nation that balances modernity with tradition. For many, seeing a geisha perform or simply walk through Kyoto's alleys is a profound encounter with cultural heritage. Even when filtered through stereotypes, this fascination sustains international interest, ensuring that geisha remain relevant in global imagination. Philosophically, the global image of geisha illustrates the dynamics of cultural translation. When traditions cross borders, they are often reshaped by the lenses of those who receive them. The geisha abroad are not always the same as the geisha at home. They become hybrid symbols, part reality, part fantasy. This hybridity, though problematic, also ensures their survival, as fascination, even when flawed, creates opportunities for preservation. By the 21st century, the geisha have become global metaphors for beauty, mystery, resilience, and impermanence. They are admired as symbols of Japanese culture, misread as exotic courtesans, celebrated as artists, and critiqued as stereotypes. Their global image is layered, contradictory, and evolving, just as their reality has always been. What matters most, perhaps, is that geisha communities continue to assert their own narratives. By speaking for themselves, by preserving their artistry, and by engaging with the world on their own terms, they reclaim control of their identity. In doing so, they remind the world that they are not fantasies, but living women, artists whose refinement is real, whose presence is fleeting, and whose meaning transcends stereotype. In the global imagination, few figures embody Japan as powerfully as the geisha. Alongside samurai, cherry blossoms, and Mount Fuji, the image of a geisha in silk kimono, her face painted in serene white, has become shorthand for Japanese identity. Yet, unlike static symbols, the geisha are living beings, carrying centuries of tradition in gestures and smiles, embodying both continuity and transformation. Their symbolic role extends beyond entertainment, reaching into diplomacy, tourism, and cultural branding. Cultural diplomacy has long drawn upon geisha as representatives of Japan's refinement. When foreign dignitaries visit Kyoto or Tokyo, performances by geisha are often arranged as part of official receptions. These evenings, carefully staged, introduce guests not only to music and dance, but to values of elegance, hospitality, and discipline. The presence of geisha in such contexts communicates a message. Japan is a nation that treasures its traditions even as it engages with the modern world. In this sense, geisha function as cultural ambassadors, embodying a national identity that is both ancient and adaptable. Tourism reinforces this role. For many international visitors, encountering geisha is among the highlights of a trip to Japan. Travel brochures and websites often feature images of Maiko in colorful kimono walking through the alleys of Gion, promising glimpses of authentic Japan. These images attract millions, sustaining both local economies and cultural preservation. Even when tourists misunderstand or oversimplify, their fascination ensures that geisha remain visible and relevant, drawing attention to traditions that might otherwise fade. The role of geisha in national branding is equally significant. In global marketing campaigns, from airline advertisements to Olympic ceremonies, geisha imagery is used to signal Japan's uniqueness. They stand as icons of refinement, offering contrast to the nation's reputation for technology and industry. Where bullet trains and electronics represent modernity, geisha represent tradition. Together, they form a dual identity that Japan projects to the world. This duality, ancient and modern, fleeting and enduring, has become central to Japan's cultural diplomacy. Yet this symbolic role carries tensions. To be used as national icons risks reducing geisha to mere imagery, stripping away the complexity of their lives. Within Japan, many geisha emphasize that they are not relics, but living practitioners of demanding art forms. They resist being flattened into stereotypes, even positive ones, insisting on recognition of their individuality and artistry. Their role as symbols of Japan is therefore double-edged. It elevates them to global significance, but risks overshadowing their personal realities. At the same time, geisha communities have learned to navigate these dynamics. They carefully manage appearances, participating in cultural exchanges that highlight artistry rather than exoticism. Some hanamachi collaborate with universities, museums, and cultural organizations to present accurate representations of their traditions. Others organize exhibitions abroad, bringing dance, music, and tea ceremony to international audiences in controlled settings. These efforts ensure that geisha are seen not only as symbols, but as artists in their own right. The symbolic connection between geisha and Japan also reflects deeper philosophical currents. Geisha embody impermanence, refinement, and discipline, values central to Japanese aesthetics. To present geisha to the world is to present these values: beauty in transience, elegance in restraint, resilience in fragility. In this sense, geisha are not only performers, but metaphors for the Japanese way of engaging with life. Their presence reminds global audiences that Japan's identity cannot be reduced to technology or industry alone. It is also rooted in art, subtlety, and mindfulness. Globally, this symbolism resonates in diverse ways. For some, geisha represent exotic allure, captivating because they seem distant from modern life. For others, they symbolize continuity, proof that tradition can endure in a rapidly changing world. For still others, they embody universal lessons, the value of presence, the art of refinement, the strength of resilience. These multiple interpretations reflect the richness of their image, which cannot be confined to a single narrative. Critics sometimes question whether geisha, as symbols of Japan, reinforce gendered stereotypes. The image of a woman in kimono serving and entertaining men can be seen as perpetuating patriarchal ideals. Feminist scholars debate whether geisha should be celebrated as empowered professionals or critiqued as constrained by tradition. This debate adds another layer of complexity to their symbolic role. For many geisha, however, their identity lies beyond such binaries. They see themselves as artists, neither passive symbols nor political statements, but practitioners of a demanding and meaningful craft. By the 21st century, the geisha had become more than cultural figures. They had become cultural metaphors. They represent the paradox of Japan, modern yet traditional, global yet particular, fragile yet enduring. Their role in diplomacy, tourism, and branding ensures that they will remain visible in global imagination, even as their numbers decline. In this sense, they embody a truth that resonates far beyond Japan, that the survival of tradition depends not on resisting change, but on embracing impermanence with grace. To see a geisha perform today is therefore not only to witness art, but to glimpse Japan itself, its history, its aesthetics, its resilience. Whether entertaining in tatami rooms, dancing on festival stages, or appearing in cultural exchanges abroad, geisha continue to serve as living metaphors for a nation negotiating its identity in a globalized world. They are blossoms that bloom briefly yet brilliantly, reminding us that symbols, like beauty, gain power not from permanence, but from presence. From the moment Westerners first encountered geisha, artists and writers rushed to capture their image. In the 19th century, when Japan opened its ports after centuries of relative isolation, foreign travelers were enchanted by what they saw. Women in silk kimono, painted in white, playing shamisen in lantern-lit rooms. These impressions quickly found their way into paintings, essays, and novels, where geisha were often transformed from living women into exotic symbols. Orientalist art of the 19th century portrayed geisha as embodiments of sensual mystery. European painters, fascinated by Japanese aesthetics, often depicted them with exaggerated features of delicacy, grace, and passivity. In these works, the nuance of geisha artistry, the wit, discipline, and independence, was stripped away, replaced with fantasy. Geisha became icons of the Orient rather than of Japan, their individuality erased in favor of stereotypes that appealed to Western imagination. Literature followed a similar pattern. Travelogues and novels written by foreigners frequently conflated geisha with courtesans, unable or unwilling to distinguish between artistry and sexuality. This misrepresentation was not merely error, but reflection of deeper dynamics. The West's desire to see the East as mysterious, alluring, and submissive. Geisha thus became central characters in narratives that said more about Western fantasies than about Japanese realities. In the 20th century, cinema amplified these distortions. Early films introduced geisha characters as tragic heroines, often caught between love and duty, tradition and modernity. While these stories captivated audiences, they often reinforced narrow views of geisha as symbols of sacrifice and romance, rather than as professionals rooted in artistic tradition. Hollywood, in particular, contributed to these misconceptions, framing geisha in ways that emphasized exotic beauty while neglecting their complexity. The publication of Arthur Golden's Memoirs of a Geisha in 1997 marked a turning point. The novel, written by an American author, presented a fictionalized account of geisha life through the eyes of a young protagonist. It was immensely successful, translated into dozens of languages and selling millions of copies worldwide. For many readers, it was their first exposure to the concept of geisha, and it shaped global perceptions profoundly. Yet within Japan, it was widely criticized. Geisha themselves objected to its inaccuracies, particularly its conflation of geisha with courtesans and its melodramatic treatment of their experiences. Scholars, too, noted its Orientalist tone, arguing that it perpetuated Western fantasies rather than presenting authentic realities. The 2005 film adaptation deepened these dynamics. Lavishly produced and visually stunning, it brought geisha imagery to millions of moviegoers worldwide. But it also reignited debates about authenticity, especially because its lead actresses were not Japanese but Chinese, sparking controversy about cultural representation. While the film amplified fascination, it also entrenched stereotypes, leaving geisha communities to confront a surge of attention that was both beneficial and problematic. Beyond Memoirs of a Geisha, other media have contributed to global fascination. Documentaries, photo books, and fashion campaigns often feature geisha or maiko, presenting them as emblems of Japanese refinement. Photographers in particular have been drawn to their visual elegance, producing iconic images that circulate widely. Yet even here, the line between representation and reduction remains delicate. A photograph captures surface beauty but rarely conveys the years of discipline, training, and sacrifice behind it. Japanese media have also shaped perceptions, though often in more nuanced ways. Novels, films, and television dramas within Japan have portrayed geisha with greater attention to detail, exploring the complexities of their lives, their struggles, and their resilience. Some works present them as heroines of continuity, others as women navigating change. These depictions, while varied, help counterbalance foreign stereotypes, reminding audiences that geisha are not abstractions but living professionals with individuality. In the 21st century, social media added new layers. Images of maiko walking through Kyoto circulate instantly, reaching millions worldwide. Travel influencers feature them as highlights of Japan, while cultural organizations share videos of performances to educate audiences. This visibility sustains global fascination, but also risks trivialization, as fleeting images replace deeper understanding. To counter this, geisha districts and preservation groups increasingly use digital platforms to provide context, framing geisha not as spectacles, but as artists. The cultural meaning of geisha in art and literature is thus profoundly double-edged. On one side, they are celebrated as symbols of elegance and mystery, inspiring countless works across mediums. On the other, they are reduced to stereotypes, misrepresented in ways that obscure their true identity. The tension between these poles reflects broader dynamics of cultural exchange. How traditions are received, reimagined, and sometimes distorted when viewed through foreign eyes. Yet perhaps this tension also explains their enduring fascination. Geisha are not easily categorized. They resist reduction to single meanings, embodying paradoxes that captivate artists and audiences alike. They are fragile yet resilient, traditional yet adaptive, local yet global. In this sense, every depiction, whether accurate or not, testifies to their symbolic power. They compel imagination, invite interpretation, and demand reflection. By the 2020s, the narrative around geisha in art and media has begun to shift. Greater efforts are made to highlight authenticity, to present geisha as artists rather than fantasies. Documentaries produced in collaboration with Hanamachi show the discipline of training, the hardships of apprenticeship, the reality behind the elegance. Museums and exhibitions around the world present geisha traditions as heritage rather than exoticism. Slowly, the balance is correcting. Those stereotypes remain strong. Ultimately, the portrayal of geisha in global art and media reveals as much about the world's imagination as it does about the women themselves. They are mirrors reflecting desires, fantasies, and values projected onto them. But they are also living presences, reminding us that beyond the image lies reality. Women who laugh, struggle, persevere, and dance, embodying impermanence not as a fantasy, but as a lived truth. To reflect on the meaning of geisha in the global imagination is to reflect on the meaning of beauty itself. More than performers, they have become living metaphors for questions that humanity continues to ask. What does it mean to preserve tradition in a world of change? What is the role of women in societies shaped by both continuity and disruption? How can fragility endure, and how can impermanence become strength? Philosophically, geisha embody the Japanese aesthetic of mono-no-aware, the awareness of life's fleeting beauty. Every gesture, every song, every dance they perform is a meditation on impermanence. Audiences are invited to experience the moment fully, knowing it will never return. In this way, geisha remind both Japanese and global audiences that beauty is not something to be possessed, but something to be encountered, briefly and deeply. In an age dominated by permanence, digital archives, endless replication, this philosophy carries profound resonance. They also symbolize the discipline of artistry. Unlike modern celebrities who may achieve fame overnight, geisha cultivates skill through years of training, sacrifice, and refinement. Their art is not accidental but intentional, crafted through effort and humility. This dimension challenges global audiences to reconsider their relationship to art and success. Geisha stand as reminders that mastery requires time, and that true beauty often lies in what is patiently built rather than instantly consumed. In terms of gender, geisha embody paradoxes that continue to fascinate. To some, they represent empowerment. Women who, in a patriarchal society, carved out spaces of independence, earning livelihoods, and commanding respect through wit and skill. To others, they symbolize constraint. Women bound by tradition, discipline, and systems of patronage. This duality cannot be easily resolved, and perhaps it should not be. Their meaning lies precisely in the tension between freedom and structure, between agency and expectation. In this way, geisha provoke reflection not only on Japanese gender roles, but on universal questions of womanhood. Globally, the geisha also serve as metaphors for cultural survival. In an era of globalization, many traditions risk being erased by uniformity. Yet the geisha endure, not because they resist change completely, but because they adapt while preserving essence. Their survival demonstrates a lesson for all cultures, that tradition need not be static to endure. By flowing with change while holding to core values, geisha show how cultural practices can remain vital in modernity. Their meaning also extends to questions of identity. For Japan, geisha are symbols of cultural uniqueness, reminders that the nation's identity is rooted not only in technology and industry, but in art, refinement, and impermanence. For the world, they represent the possibility of encountering difference with respect, of engaging with traditions that resist simplification. To encounter a geisha is to encounter a worldview that values subtlety, presence, and fragility. A worldview often at odds with the noise of modern life. The global perception of geisha as mysterious and elusive also highlights the human fascination with what cannot be fully known. In an age of instant access, their aura of secrecy offers a rare experience, the allure of mystery. Audiences are drawn not only to what geisha reveal, but also to what they withhold. Their refusal to be fully explained is itself a form of artistry, reminding the world that not all truths can be captured, and not all beauty can be dissected. At the same time, geisha inspire reflection on resilience. Their history is marked by survival through upheaval, wars, occupations, economic collapse, modernization, pandemics. Each time they have adapted, reshaped, and continued. Their survival is not merely cultural, but existential, a testament to the human capacity to endure through impermanence. In this sense, they embody resilience as philosophy. Fragility embraced with grace becomes strength. For global audiences, the geisha thus carry multiple layers of meaning. They are symbols of beauty, of discipline, of gendered paradox, of cultural survival, of resilience. They are admired, misrepresented, romanticized, critiqued, and celebrated. Their meaning shifts depending on the lens, but the fact that they continue to provoke reflection is itself significant. They remain relevant not only because of what they are, but because of what they represent. Questions larger than themselves, questions about art, tradition, identity, and life. Ultimately, geisha, as cultural symbols, remind us of something deeply human, that life is fleeting, that beauty is fragile, and that meaning often resides not in permanence, but in presence. Whether encountered in Kyoto's lantern-lit alleys, in a staged festival performance, or in global imagination, they invite us to pause, to reflect, to see the world differently. In their silence and their song, in their fragility and their endurance, they embody a truth that transcends borders. Impermanence is not the enemy of life, but its essence. To the outside world, geisha appear as paragons of elegance. Lantern light catches the shimmer of silk kimono. Shamisen notes drift into the night. A smile, painted and precise, offers warmth to patrons. But behind the scenes, beyond the tea houses and stages, lies another world, one shaped by discipline, sacrifice, and private struggles. To understand geisha fully, one must look not only at their public performances, but at the hidden rhythms of their personal lives. The heart of a geisha's personal world is the ukiyo, the lodging house where she lives, trains, and grows from apprentice to professional. Far from being glamorous, daily life in an ukiyo is marked by discipline. Apprentices wake early, long before the day's performances, to clean tatami floors, polish instruments, and prepare tea. Chores are not punishment, but training. They teach humility, attention to detail, and respect for the spaces in which art will later unfold. Through repetition, young women learn that refinement is not only in dance or music, but in the care of everyday life. The structure of the ukiyo creates a family of sorts, though one bound by discipline rather than blood. At the head stands the okasan, the house mother, whose authority shapes every aspect of life. She arranges engagements, oversees finances, and ensures that apprentices follow the rules. For many young women, the okasan becomes both strict guardian and surrogate parent, offering guidance but demanding obedience. Relationships within the ukiyo are layered. Senior geisha mentor younger ones, apprentices look up to their elders, and bonds of solidarity form amid shared hardship. Training dominates personal life. Hours are spent practicing shamisen, rehearsing dances, and memorizing songs. Lessons are demanding, often requiring perfection in the smallest detail. A misstep in a dance or a note played flat on the shamisen is corrected immediately, sometimes harshly. Apprentices learn not only technique, but endurance. The ability to repeat a gesture countless times until it flows effortlessly. This rigor shapes character as much as skill, instilling discipline that carries into every aspect of life. Sacrifice defines much of a geisha's personal journey. To enter the profession often means leaving family behind, dedicating oneself entirely to the ukiyo. Education may be limited. Social life outside the hanamachi is constrained. Friendships with peers are rare, as free time is scarce. Romantic relationships are complicated, sometimes forbidden for apprentices, often entangled with the structures of patronage. For many geisha, personal desires must yield to professional duty, at least during the years of apprenticeship and early career. Yet amid these sacrifices, there is also joy. The bonds formed within the ukiyo often become lifelong, with sisters in art supporting one another through triumphs and hardships. The pride of mastering a difficult dance, the thrill of debuting as a maiko, the warmth of an appreciative audience. These moments infuse meaning into the long hours of discipline. Geisha life is not only hardship, but also the deep satisfaction of living within an art form, of embodying beauty and tradition. Financial realities also shape personal lives. Historically, many geisha carried debts to their ukiyo, which covered the costs of kimono, training, and living expenses. Repaying these debts required years of work, and financial independence was often elusive. Patronage systems, including relationships with dana, offered both support and complexity. While some relationships brought stability and even affection, others created dependency, blurring the lines between personal and professional. The interplay of economics and intimacy defined much of geisha life behind the kimono. Privacy was always limited. The image of elegance maintained in public extended into personal spaces, with expectations of behavior at all times. Gossip within the hanamachi was constant, and reputations could be damaged by even small missteps. For apprentices especially, the pressure to embody idealized refinement was relentless. leaving little room for rebellion or individuality. Yet within these constraints, geisha found ways to express themselves. Through personal touches in kimono choice, through quiet acts of solidarity, through humor shared in private moments. Health and physical strain also marked personal lives. The weight of elaborate kimono, the difficulty of traditional hairstyles, the hours spent kneeling on tatami, these took tolls on the body. Geisha endured pain with composure, concealing discomfort beneath smile. Their physical endurance became another layer of discipline, a hidden sacrifice that audiences rarely saw. Despite the hardships, many geisha expressed pride in their lives. For them, the sacrifices were part of a larger calling, to embody tradition, to live within art, to carry forward something fragile yet enduring. Their personal struggles were not separate from their public roles, but intertwined, shaping the grace that audiences admired. Behind every flawless performance lay years of effort, discipline, and resilience. The personal lives of geisha thus reveal a paradox. They are worlds of sacrifice, yet also of pride, of constraint, yet also of agency, of hardship, yet also of joy. They remind us that beauty often emerges from discipline, that elegance is born of effort, that impermanence is sustained by resilience. To see the painted face and flowing sleeves is to see only the surface. To know the geisha fully is to recognize the unseen world behind the kimono, where art and life are inseparable. Behind the elegance of the banquet hall and the shimmer of silk kimono lies a more intimate layer of geisha life. Their relationships. These bonds, friendships, rivalries, romances, and patronage ties form the emotional landscape behind the carefully maintained surface of refinement. While audiences see grace and laughter, the geisha's personal world is textured with longing, sacrifice, and human complexity. Friendship within the hanamechi is both natural and constrained. Apprentices, living side by side in ukiyo, share chores, training, and long hours of practice. Bonds of sisterhood emerge, forged through shared hardship and mutual encouragement. A young maiko struggling to perfect a dance may find comfort in the whispered support of an older sister. These relationships often last lifetimes, sustained by memories of training years and the solidarity of survival in a demanding world. Yet rivalry is never absent. Engagements are limited, patrons selective, and competition can strain even the closest friendships. The hanamachi is both family and arena, a place where affection and ambition coexist uneasily. Romantic love presents even greater complexity. For apprentices, relationships are often restricted or discouraged, the focus expected to remain entirely on training and performance. The discipline of geisha life leaves little time for courtship, and secrecy surrounds any attachments that develop. For established geisha, romance is possible but complicated by the structures of patronage. The image of refinement must be preserved, and personal desires often yield to professional obligations. Many geisha navigate these waters carefully, balancing private emotions with the public expectations of elegance. The role of the dana, the patron, adds another layer. Traditionally, a dana was a wealthy man, often a businessman, artist, or aristocrat, who provided financial support to a geisha, covering the costs of kimono, training, and living expenses. In return, he received not only companionship, but also the prestige of being associated with refinement. Some relationships between geisha and dana were purely financial. formal arrangements that ensured stability for the geisha and cultural status for the patron. Others evolved into deep emotional bonds, marked by affection and even love. Still others were fraught with dependency, imbalance, or disappointment. For geisha, the presence of a dana could mean security or constraint. A generous patron might free her from debts, allowing her to focus entirely on art. But reliance on a single man also carried risks. The collapse of his fortune, the waning of his interest, or the demands of exclusivity. Some geisha embraced such relationships as partnerships. Others resisted them as limiting. Over time, as society modernized and corporate structures replaced personal patronage, the system of dana diminished, though its legacy still shapes perceptions of geisha life. The emotional lives of geisha thus unfolded in delicate balance. They were women admired for grace, yet rarely free to express longing openly. They were trained to laugh at jokes, to pour sake with elegance, to engage in witty conversation. Yet their own feelings often remained hidden behind the mask of refinement. Some found genuine companionship with patrons or colleagues. Others endured loneliness, softened only by the solidarity of their sisters in art. In interviews, retired geisha sometimes spoke of longing for ordinary lives, marriage, children, domestic simplicity, while others expressed pride in having chosen a different path, one of artistry and independence. Family relationships added further nuance. Many geisha entered the profession young, leaving behind parents and siblings. Contact was limited, sometimes by distance, sometimes by the demands of training. For some, the ukiyo became a surrogate family, with the okei-san as mother and fellow apprentices as sisters. For others, the separation left wounds of longing, especially when ties to birth families were severed. In rare cases, families opposed the decision to become a geisha, fearing stigma or misunderstanding. In other cases, they supported it as an honorable path, proud to see their daughter embody refinement. Motherhood was uncommon, as the demands of geisha life left little space for raising children. Some geisha, after retiring, chose to marry and start families, while others dedicated their lives entirely to art. In this way, geisha often lived outside conventional female roles, their independence admired by some and questioned by others. Their lives challenged assumptions of womanhood, embodying possibilities beyond the domestic sphere. Yet for all their complexities, the relationships of geisha reveal a profound humanity. They are not only symbols of tradition, but women with longings, attachments, and sacrifices. Their friendships are tender, their rivalries sharp, their romances complicated, their patronage ties layered with power and vulnerability. To see them only as painted icons is to miss the depth of their emotional worlds. Behind the kimono lies the same spectrum of desire and disappointment, joy and sorrow, that defines all human lives. These hidden stories also explain the depth of their artistry. A dance of longing, a song of loss, a smile tinged with melancholy, all are infused with lived experience. The refinement admired by patrons is not separate from the personal sacrifices that shape it. Geisha art is powerful precisely because it is born of discipline and desire, constraint and resilience. It is the expression of women who, behind painted faces, live complex and courageous lives. In this sense, the personal relationships of geisha are not separate from their cultural meaning, but integral to it. They remind us that tradition is not abstract but lived, carried forward by individuals with hearts and histories. The geisha's smile at a banquet may conceal longing, but it also radiates strength. Her laughter may mask constraint, but it also expresses resilience. Her art is inseparable from her life, and her life inseparable from her art. If the banquet hall was the stage of a geisha's public life, then the rhythms of daily routine formed the quiet backdrop. To outsiders, the sight of a geisha in perfect kimono and flawless makeup suggested effortless grace. Yet behind this illusion lay hours of discipline, countless acts of preparation, and a way of life that demanded constant attention to body, mind, and spirit. A geisha's day often began early. Apprentices, in particular, rose before dawn to complete household chores in the ukiyo. Tatami mats needed to be brushed, sliding doors polished, and the courtyard swept clean. These tasks, though menial, were part of training. They instilled humility, precision, and attentiveness to detail. To polish a wooden beam until it gleamed was to learn the same care required for perfecting a dance or pouring tea with elegance. Morning hours were devoted to lessons. Dance schools opened their doors, and the sounds of shamisen echoed through Hanamachi districts as apprentices practiced scales, melodies, and entire repertoires. Dances were rehearsed repeatedly, gestures corrected until they flowed seamlessly. Calligraphy and tea ceremony lessons followed, each discipline reinforcing values of patience and refinement. These lessons were not optional, but central, shaping both artistry and identity. A young apprentice's life was filled less with leisure than with relentless cultivation of skill. Meals reflected both practicality and ritual. Traditional Japanese foods, rice, miso soup, seasonal vegetables, grilled fish, formed the basis of their diet. Portions were modest, emphasizing balance rather than indulgence. Health was essential, for the demands of performance required stamina. Yet the grace expected of geisha discouraged any hint of excess. Eating, like dancing or playing shamisen, was practiced with attention, chopsticks handled gracefully, conversation balanced with respect. Even at the dining table, refinement was rehearsed. Beauty routines were another constant presence. The iconic white makeup worn by geisha and maiko was more than decoration, that it was ritual. Applying it required patience and skill, each layer brushed carefully to create a flawless canvas. For maiko, the process was even more elaborate, involving not only makeup, but intricate hairstyles adorned with seasonal ornaments. Maintaining these styles could be uncomfortable, requiring sleeping on raised pillows to preserve shape. Yet the discomfort was endured with quiet discipline, for appearance was inseparable from artistry. The kimono, too, demanded devotion. Each garment was a work of art, its patterns reflecting seasons, festivals, and personal status. Dressing in kimono was a complex ritual requiring assistance, as layers had to be wrapped, folded, and tied precisely. Apprentices often relied on dressers to help them prepare, learning gradually to understand the symbolism of colors and motifs. To wear a kimono improperly was unthinkable, for clothing spoke as eloquently as words. Health and endurance were constant concerns. The weight of layered kimono, the strain of kneeling on tatami, and the long hours of dance practice taxed the body. Foot pain, backaches, and fatigue were common, but rarely acknowledged publicly. Geisha were expected to conceal discomfort, to maintain smiles even when weary. Behind the mask of elegance lay resilience, a physical strength that audiences seldom saw, but that sustained every performance. Despite the rigor, moments of joy threaded through daily life. Apprentices laughed together during breaks, sharing gossip or small treats. Festivals brought excitement as preparations for public performances filled the hanamachi with anticipation. The first time a maiko successfully played a difficult shamisen piece or mastered a dance was celebrated with pride. Even in the strictest households, there were moments of warmth, humor, and companionship. Reminders that behind discipline lay humanity. Evenings brought the culmination of the day's preparation, the ozashiki. After hours of lessons, meals, and grooming, geisha stepped into the night, transformed into embodiments of refinement. They walked through lantern-lit streets, their wooden sandals clacking softly, their presence turning heads even before they entered the tea house. There, amid sake, laughter, and music, they performed the roles for which they had trained. Entertainers, artists, conversationalists, companions. For a few hours, fatigue was forgotten, replaced by the magic of presence. When the banquets ended, often late into the night, geisha returned to their ukiyo. Removing makeup, untying kimono, and loosening hairpins was a ritual of undoing, stripping away the public mask. Behind closed doors, they were simply women again, weary yet proud, their elegance no less real for being momentarily unadorned. Some collapsed into sleep immediately, others lingered, sharing quiet conversations with housemates. These private hours, unseen by patrons, were the hidden heart of their humanity. The cycle repeated day after day, week after week, year after year. To live as a geisha was to live in rhythm. Discipline in the morning, artistry in the afternoon, performance in the evening, reflection at night. It was a life of constancy and impermanence, each day similar yet never the same. The discipline of routine created the freedom of artistry, allowing geisha to embody elegance with apparent effortlessness. For outsiders, such a life might seem austere, even oppressive. Yet many geisha described it as deeply fulfilling. They took pride in living within art, in shaping each gesture, each meal, each hour into an act of refinement. Their daily routines were not separate from their identity, but expressions of it. To wake early, to practice tirelessly, to endure discomfort with grace, these were not sacrifices, but affirmations of who they were. In the end, the personal routines of geisha reveal the foundation behind the elegance admired by audiences. What appears effortless is the product of countless unseen acts of discipline. What seems natural is cultivated with intention. The shimmer of kimono, the grace of a bow, the beauty of a smile, all are sustained by the hidden world of daily life. Behind the surface lies a truth as profound as any philosophy. That art is not performance alone, but the way one lives, moment by moment, with presence and care. Thank you, dear listener, for staying with me through this part of our journey into the world of the geisha. But the story is far from finished. In the next part, we will step even deeper into the hidden layers of their lives, their artistry, their philosophies, and the meanings that carried them across centuries. If this story has brought you peace or inspiration, please share in the comments where in the world you are listening from and what time it is right now. I love seeing how far this journey travels. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the continuation of this long and beautiful story. Until next time, may your nights be calm and your days filled with quiet beauty.